This month on Focus, Black Oklahoma, we'll dig into the controversy of school choice and what it means in practice for Oklahomans at various school systems.
Hate crimes against the Asian community are still rising astronomically since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll hear from Asian American women about how they are coping and how the rest of us can help.
Some Americans are experiencing COVID-19 symptoms that last 60 days or longer after initial infection. We'll learn more about Oklahoma researchers launching a formal study on long COVID. A local festival leaves the Cheyenne Arapaho tribes feeling the loss of their land, history, and ancestry.
All of this and more on Focus, Black Oklahoma.
Support comes from Phillips Seminary, announcing the Tulsa Race Massacre annual lectureship April 25th with the author of Lynched, The Power of Memory in a Culture of Terror, online at ptstulsa.edu/lectures.
This is Focus Black Oklahoma. I'm Colby Webster.
And I'm Kuma Roberts.
Focus Black Oklahoma has been selected to participate in the Advancing Democracy cohort with the Solutions Journalism Network, or SJN. Our series, In a Confused State, will follow Oklahoma advocacy groups navigating new restrictions on freedoms in 4 areas: reproductive rights, voting laws, teaching history, and direct action and activism. Here, Nick Alexandrov explores school choice, the complicated history of the term, and the reality of its execution and practice within the state's various private, public, and charter school systems.
Underfunded schools, schools with black mold, with textbooks that are over a decade old.
A very stretched environment.
Kids that were being pulled out for ESL classes, even though we spoke English in the home.
Money that should be flowing down into the teacher's pay.
All of these people, and we'll hear more from them soon, agree on one thing. Oklahoma's public schools are not doing well. But when you ask, what's the solution, that's where differences emerge.
If you're worried about the public school funding, then have the public school step up and do what the private school and the charter school are doing.
Ron Cosby lives in Owasso.
I was raised here in Oklahoma and went to public schools all my life here and graduated with 43 other wonderful people from Warner America.
He's a recent adherent to what he calls school choice.
First time I heard about school choice was when Betsy DeVos was nominated for Secretary of Education.
That was under President Donald Trump.
And she was pro school choice. And I was like, oh, okay, that's great, whatever. But COVID hadn't hit.
When it did, he threw himself into activism.
Before 2020, I never had been to a school board meeting. I just trusted that teachers and admin took care of business and took care of my children and educated like they were supposed to. And then in August of 2020, we were getting emails from Amy Fitchner, who was the current superintendent, saying, hey, we may have to go to distance learning. This pandemic is horrible. We have to shut schools down. And I'm thinking to myself, well, the casinos are still open. Walmart's still open. Target's still open. The virus is in the community. Why are we just shutting down schools? So we went to the school board and we said, hey, 80% of Owasso wants to go in person. And Amy Fitchner, the superintendent, said, no, I know what's best for public health. You're not a public health advocate. You're a public education advocate. Stay in your lane. We'll do what's best for our children as far as public health is concerned. You do what we hired you to do. And she didn't. She shut down schools.
As Cosby tells it, virtual learning was not an option for his children.
I have a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old, both of them diagnosed with ADD. I can't sit them at the table. It was a horrible experience. So luckily, we were 20 miles away from a school that stayed open the entire year. So we got an emergency transfer to Oologah up the street. So I would drive them 30 minutes one way every day, drop them off, pick them up.
At the same time, he and other parents protested school closures in Owasso. They focused their discontent on Superintendent Fitchner.
And within a month, she had opened them up because of the immense pressure.
Fitchner resigned that November. In the following months, Cosby and other members of the Parent Voice Oklahoma group pushed for Senate Bill 210. The measure, which never left committee, would have permitted the removal of school board members via recall petitions, and it reflected Cosby's outlook on education.
My best description of school choice is it gives the parents the opportunity to do the very best decision that they decide what's best for their children's schooling and education. So if they think that's public school, that's wonderful. That they a magnet school, a charter school, a private school, whatever, it gives the parents the opportunity and the choice to make sure that their child is best educated.
Cosby's definition of school choice is expansive. It relates to school funding, school closures, emergency school transfers, parent influence on school boards, and more. And that's one problem critics have with the concept. They say it's too vague, nondescript. The Associated Press, for example, has suggested journalists avoid the term altogether. And Clark Fraley, a Southern Baptist pastor and member of the group Pastors for Oklahoma Kids, has other issues with the term.
School choice, what it's called now, is kind of a politicized term that's not really completely accurate. I've never met anyone that's against school choice or parents' rights or parent voice being raised in these issues.
He notes that school choice programs already exist.
We're the only state in the entire nation that has protected homeschooling in our state constitution.
And we have more school choice than all of our surrounding states as well.
That's Catherine Bishop, the president of the Oklahoma Education Association.
We have an open transfer law that if they have space, you can go there.
Fraley is not against parents having options for their children. Instead, he opposes measures that target public school funding.
We're for private schools. We're for public charter schools. Like whatever choice you want to make is fine. We're not talking about school choice when we're talking about these policies that bring on. We're talking about school subsidy. We're talking about schools being subsidized, private enterprises being subsidized by tax dollars that people have put forward for public education in particular. And it's not coming out of the health department's budget. It's not coming out of Bridges and Roads budget. It's coming directly out of the State Department's allocation for public education.
Our correspondent Crystal Patrick talked about these subsidies last month. Through school vouchers, parents can take money designated for their children's public education and use it to pay for private school. One example is the Lindsay Nicole Henry Scholarship, which was enacted in 2010. Parents of public school students with disabilities who want to transfer their children to private schools are eligible for that program. Fraley argues that today, vouchers are pitched to indignant parents as a cure-all solution.
That's the way I feel about vouchers in Oklahoma. It's like a snake oil salesman kind of thing. It's saying, hey, are you angry about masks? Hey, are you angry at your school board? Hey, you're angry about books? Hey, you angry about CRT? Hey, you angry? Well, vouchers is the way. They never connect the dots to how that is the way, how that really would solve that problem, and how that wouldn't make problems really bad for the kids that are left behind in public schools. They never connect those dots. It's just a very simplistic kind of math that doesn't add up. There's no math on planet Earth where you can take away resources from the schools that serve 90% of the children in the state, 700,000 kids, and say that's going to help them.
And state legislators might add another variable to the equation: education savings accounts, or ESAs. These allow parents to use public funding not only for private school, but for any education expense like online classes or private tutoring. Senate Bill 1647, which won approval in the Senate Education Committee in February and cleared the Senate Appropriations Committee this month, would open these accounts in Oklahoma. The bill, known as the Oklahoma Empowerment Act, has prominent backers. Governor Kevin Stitt and Senate Pro Tem Greg Treat, a Republican from Oklahoma City, are among them. Catherine Bishop, the Oklahoma Education Association's president, considers it an ominous development.
That bill would decimate our public schools. It will cripple our rural communities. And I've had the opportunity to travel our state for the last several years. And one of the things that is very apparent and very clear in our rural communities, the public school is the hub of that community. So if you just take I-40 corridor from, let's just take Seminole East, every one of those communities on that highway, the school system is the largest employer of that community. People have moved to rural communities because of their schools. And so they wouldn't be able to survive if this bill passed.
Fraley shares this assessment. It is, in a sense, a personal issue for him.
I'm a native Oklahoman. I grew up here in a very small, rural, poor district. I graduated with 20 students.
And he adds that, much as our state already has school choice measures on the books, it's already doing a lot to aid private schools.
We are by a multiple of at least 6 or 7 times more heavily investing in public funding of private schools than any state around us. And now we're talking about, something without guardrails on it.
One of those guardrails is the Blaine Amendment, which prohibits state money from going to religious organizations like private schools. Oklahoma's Blaine Amendment is in Article 2, Section 5 of the state constitution. But education savings accounts, the accounts that Senate Bill 1647 proposes, can bypass this barrier. It's a policy, public funding for parochial schools, that doesn't sit well with Ron Cosby.
Taking money from a publicly funded school to give to a private religious school, I kind of have a problem with that because that's, separation of church and state.
But he insists there are valid reasons for opting out of public school systems.
The reason that these parents are wanting to take their child from the public schools to the private schools is because the private schools have to listen to the parents. The public schools already have the money in the bank and they can do what they want.
He's not alone in this view. The same factors led Robert Ruiz to charter schools.
I am the executive director of Choice Matters, and I was born in San Antonio, Texas, into one of the poorest neighborhoods there. And we were lucky that, my father, through his, auto mechanic work, and my mother was a secretary at a local hospital, that we were able to get some pretty good opportunities that were really my parents exercising choice by, moving us into better neighborhoods and thus into better schools.
Now a parent himself, Ruiz was disappointed with his children's public school experiences.
As our children began to get older, we noticed that even living in Norman, Oklahoma, which I think most people would consider to be a very good community as far as where it comes to education in the schools, that not all schools are created equal. And the school that my kids were assigned to in Norman, because we lived downtown in Norman, wasn't of the highest quality. And we really didn't notice that until our kids started going to school. I think there were a lot of assumptions made about our kids, possibly because of their last names. And, we had kids that were being pulled out for ESL classes, even though we spoke English in the home. And I understand that in general, Norman really tries to, avoid those kinds of situations, but it was happening nonetheless.
For him, the solution lies in
new models of education. We helped in the North Tulsa and the Greenwood Leadership Academy organizing over there. We helped with the Community Sovereign School in OKC. We helped 100 Latino parents create a model of education called the Heritage Academy, which is kind of like a dual language, bicultural, biliteracy program that has those Latino studies and that culturally relevant curriculum incorporated into the model.
I reached out to the Greenwood Leadership Academy and Heritage Academy, as well as to the Tulsa Honor Academy, another school Ruiz praised, to learn more about their work, but none of them responded to my interview requests. Ruiz believes these schools expand opportunities to new groups.
School choice has existed for a long time, but it's been mostly limited to people that have had resources. Where it becomes very controversial is when you start trying to give resources to families who traditionally have not had resources, to underserved communities.
To learn more about this history, I called Mercedes Schneider, the author of the book School Choice: The End of Public Education.
I have been teaching since 1991, mostly full-time in grades 7th, grade through graduate school. I have been teaching high school in Slidell, Louisiana for the past 15 years.
That's just north of New Orleans.
I went to an all-girls public middle and high school because the area I lived in and grew up in, they did not want to integrate the schools. They did not want to put Black boys and white girls together. And so they said, okay, you want us to racially integrate? Well, we're going to separate the high school and middle schools by gender.
Schneider learned through her research that her experience was common. Segregation persisted in schools throughout the South well after the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision.
I found striking the creativity of these legislators and governors in the South in trying not to integrate the schools. The game playing that went on, there was so much there. There was a point where a legislature tried to declare their public schools as non-public. Well, if we need to integrate public schools, then we will just say that they are not public schools.
It's a story other scholars have told. Duke University's Nancy McLean, in her book Democracy in Chains, describes how Virginia's conservative white leadership devised a region-wide strategy of massive resistance to public school desegregation in the 1950s. These leaders later rebranded their strategy using phrases like freedom of choice that they'd picked up from Milton Friedman, the right-wing economist. Schneider draws a direct line from that era to now.
There's something that has not changed about the idea of school vouchers, which were born out of a segregationist mentality, and that is the idea of escape. The idea of escape. That really is what is behind school voucher. Now, those who are pro-choice, they cloak it in an idea of parental empowerment and choice, but really what they are selling is an escape.
That escape, in her view, evades crucial questions, like, why are public schools underfunded? Or, why are public schools failing? Or even, why grade public schools as failing, an idea she traces to the George W. Bush years at all. And she argues that private schools are not the refuge they might seem to be.
If a person is using a voucher to escape, so to speak, a public school system in favor of a private one, that private system does not have to keep your child. That private system does not have to provide special services for your child. That private system doesn't have to provide transportation or meals for your child. And there can be lots of extra fees. So really, those who are best served in many cases by school vouchers are those that already have the means to supplement where the voucher will fall short.
She encourages parents considering vouchers to ask themselves hard questions.
Can you get the child there? Can you get the child home? Can you pay the extra fees? Are you willing to put up with more stringent discipline? What are you willing to do? Are you willing to put up with, okay, your child is in trouble at school, you must come get him now, even though the child is across town? What about special education services? Private schools are not obligated to provide special ed services. So in many cases, it's the public system that has to pick up the special education service. Or the private school can simply say, I'm sorry, we do not have English language learning classes at our school. And so people, when they use vouchers, they may hear the language of parental empowerment, but it's also very much the private school empowerment.
Catherine Bishop, the Oklahoma Education Association's president, sees this empowerment as part of a larger project.
This is a nationwide movement that is well thought out and well planned to dismantle our public schools, to discredit our public schools, discredit our educators in the public schools.
And she considers the legislation targeting critical race theory, along with the bills targeting social and emotional learning, the teaching of slavery, and school libraries, to be part of this project. Two of our correspondents, Judy Williams and Crystal Patrick, cover that legislation in our January and February episodes. An undertaking this massive, an undertaking on the scale Bishop describes, needs a lot of money to operate. And one group providing that funding, according to Schneider, is a family headquartered just over the state line in Northwest Arkansas.
The Walton family does not want to pay money for public service. The Walton family is very much against unions because the idea of little people coming together and having some kind of influence, the Walton family actively discourages that. They do not want a public infrastructure. I mean, they want everything a la carte. You pay for it as you go. Now, the Waltons do like vouchers better than charters, but they'll take charters and they'll give, for example, $250,000 for a charter startup.
Or $2.2 million. That's the amount the Walton Family Foundation has awarded the Scissortail Community Development Corporation, one of Robert Ruiz's groups, since 2015. I asked him about that.
Scissortail, we're very open about who our major funders are. And we've been very grateful for Walton. They are one of our major funders, but they're very good funders. Many times nonprofits can have grantors that are very hands-on, or that their funding comes with a lot of guidelines or strings attached. But in general, I mean, Walton has been very hands-off and just really allowed us to do the work that in the way that we feel like we want to get it done.
I asked Owasso's Ron Cosby about the Waltons as well. He compared their support for charters to one philanthropist's involvement in Tulsa Public Schools.
We also have, over in TPS, we have the George Kaiser Foundation. It's both ends of the spectrum. So when you get those big organizations, they do have agendas. They want to steer kids one way or the other, and they want their money, their profit back out of those kids. I love that. That's fine either way.
Pastor Clark Fraley disagrees. He sees
just a lot of outside money
coming into Oklahoma and supporting voucher policies.
But it's so hidden. And people that, they try to say, oh, it's not dark money. I'm like, well, if you don't know where the money's coming from, and yet you see these resources being poured into our state, and people stand to make money off of that, then you need to know.
Whether Oklahomans will learn more about these funders and whether voucher policies will be expanded this legislative session, these are among the most pressing questions for state education. They depend not just on our lawmakers, but also parents and school communities. For Focus Black Oklahoma, I'm Nick Alexandrov in Tulsa.
You're listening to Focus Black Oklahoma.
2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, Oklahoma is set to begin a study looking into the long-term effects COVID-19 is having on some who've contracted the virus. Dawn Carter has the story of how long haulers or long COVID is affecting Oklahomans and what resources may help those affected.
Over 78 million COVID-19 cases have been reported in the last 30 days, according to the Center for Disease Control, or CDC's, February tracking data. It is estimated that 1/4 to 1/3 of COVID-19 patients end up developing into long-term COVID patients. Long-term, long COVID, or post-COVID syndrome are COVID symptoms that last weeks and even months after a patient first experiences their symptoms.
I'm still having the headache and like the sore throatness.
Tyandra Ross, office manager of a local Okmulgee doctor's office, returned to work 10 days after testing positive in January of this year. Before then, Ross went the entire 2 years working around patients prior to her infection, and the headaches that she experiences now are just not the same.
This is a different type of headache. Like, I don't know, it feels different. When I was getting headaches like that, I wasn't getting them every day. I'm getting one every day.
Sometimes referred to as long haulers, patient symptoms can be new, returning, or ongoing health issues lasting 4 or more weeks. Symptoms include difficulty breathing or shortness of breath, tiredness or fatigue, stomach or chest pain, and headaches, to name a few. According to the Post-COVID Condition CDC report, multi-organ effects can also be a concern in some, quote, who had severe illness with COVID-19. Multi-organ effects can affect many, if not all, body systems, including heart, lung, kidney, skin, and brain functions, end quote.
My biggest is my respiratory. I can't hold my breath like I used to. It really affected my respiratory that first time.
Director of Nursing at a local Okmulgee healthcare facility, Jennifer Foster, has suffered a double COVID-19 infection. First in November 2020 and again in January of this year.
It's been a hard thing to adjust as far as the breath and not being able to physically do what I used to do. And I hope with endurance training, I can get at least a little bit back. At night, I've never had congestion, never. My nose will clog up. It feels like something is totally blocking my passageway. There's times I have to sleep elevated semi setting up in a way, just to breathe.
For the purpose of assessing symptoms by number of days, 0 to 10 and 61 plus, a preprint study done by the University of California COVID Research Dataset, or UC CORDS, examined 1,407 electronic medical records of those confirmed with COVID infection. Although the study is still being peer-reviewed, it has determined 27% of patients reported persistent symptoms after 60 days. Women were also more likely to become long haulers. All age groups were represented, with those aged 50 to 20 years comprising 72% of cases. According to CDC, as of July 2021, long COVID conditions can be considered a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. A little closer to home, Oklahoma will begin their own long-haul post-COVID study. The National Institutes of Health, or NIH, Recover Initiative, which stands for Researching COVID to Enhance Recovery, the nationwide research program to study long-haul COVID, has enlisted the help of the University of Oklahoma Health and Sciences Center, who's to receive $1 million in NIH funding for long COVID research to help find answers. According to a recent press release quoted from OU Daily, OU Health will enroll approximately 80 adults in 3 categories, including individuals with past COVID-19 infection and continued symptoms, those with a recent COVID-19 infection who may or may not have continued symptoms, and those who have never contracted COVID-19. Participants will undergo laboratory tests and other analysis depending on their group. Researchers will also follow participants for up to 4 years and will only focus on adults at this time. For more information on the research study or to enroll as a participant, call OU Health Study at area code 405-271-3490, or you can email them at osctr@ouhsc.edu. For Focus Black Oklahoma, I'm Don Carter in Okmulgee.
The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic continues to escalate anti-Asian language, violence, and hate crimes in the country, with incidents increasing over 300% in the last year. Contributor Lydia Zhang speaks with Asian American women who are grappling with the rise in aggressions against their communities.
Prejudice against Asian Americans has been present in American history since at least the first immigration of Chinese workers in the 1850s. Other examples include Japanese internment camps during World War II and the use of yellowface in popular culture like Breakfast at Tiffany's. The systemic oppression of Asian Americans has been overt but embedded quietly into this nation's foundation through harmful stereotyping like model minority myth. Until now, according to the Journal of Family Theory and Review, this is defined as, quote, individuals of Asian descent have been stereotypically viewed as the model minority in the United States for seemingly having achieved social and economic parity with their white counterparts. This image of success often leads others to assume that Asian Americans do not experience difficulties and/or are problem-free, thus leaving them out of research and policy considerations, end quote. The dialogue and rhetoric accompanying COVID-19, phrases like China virus and Kung flu, equated and blamed Asian Americans for the spread of the virus. This catalyzed an undeniable surge of 140% in anti-Asian violence and reported hate crimes, while overall hate crimes dropped 6%, according to the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, published in 2021. As a result, the Stop Asian Hate movement emerged with the voices of the Asian American Pacific Islander, or AAPI, community, while countless acts of violence still occur today. Melody Vo, pronouns she, her, is a Vietnamese American woman in Texas who founded and leads an Asian employee network group at her white male-dominated cybersecurity firm. She speaks to how the model minority myth overlooks the damage being done to communities and the generational and cultural responses to violence from the Asian community.
We don't get a lot of media coverage unless it's something incredibly horrific, like the Atlanta shooting that happened. But I think it's because there's almost a I see it in both ways. There's almost this model minority myth of Asians having more influence, more power, having more money. So we're not deserving of empathy because we have so much and we're these model minorities. But the flip side is some of the other Asian Americans who are being attacked, like senior citizens, people living in poverty, they're kind of like the shadow communities that people feel, why care? Why do I care about an old person? Why do I care about these poor people living in Chinatown? So it's kind of like two sides of a coin. A lot of that plays into media coverage because like these stories are being overpowered by other stories about different communities. And Asians in general are just more silent. We're not a very responsive demographic. For a lot of Asian cultures, especially Southeast Asian refugees, Cambodians, Laotians, Vietnamese, Koreans, we're so shaped by, we're just thankful to be here. Because of that, people don't ever want to cause a ruckus or make a scene. They feel more comfortable and safe just being quiet and not ever raising any issues because they don't want to be an issue in their community. They just want to be the silent, hardworking model minority.
Compared to any other demographic, Asian American women are most frequently victimized and attacked. According to Stop AAPI Hate's National Report of 2021, quote, AAPI women face a disproportionate burden of anti-AAPI hate, with 62% of all national hate incidents being reported by AAPI women, end quote. The Atlanta spa shootings incited an uproar from Asian Americans when it became known that 6 low-income Asian mothers were murdered by a white man. Gui Ying Ma, a 61-year-old woman, was recently murdered by a man with a rock that caved in half of her skull. Michelle Go was murdered by being pushed into the path of an oncoming New York City subway by a man. Christina Yuna Lee was followed into her apartment and murdered, stabbed over 40 times by a man. The lived experiences of Asian American women are often deeply misrepresented while they are fetishized and harassed by microaggressions. In the online dating world, microaggressions and misogyny are even more frequently pushed onto Asian women when behind a screen.
Just getting on dating apps and going on dates and just talking to people of all different men, not just white men, but Asian men, you see this a lot. Like the weird microaggressions targeted towards Asian American women. Like they want their geisha doll. They'll ask you if your pussy's slanted. Very, very weird microaggressions. And it's like, where does this come from? Where do these people get comfortable with speaking to Asian women this way or just speaking to any woman this way? It makes me feel dehumanized because then you're not looking at me as a person or a human. You're looking at me through the lens of whatever media portrayal you've seen, whatever porn you've seen. You're essentially tearing me down into these little things that you think that I should be.
Jade Nguyen, pronouns she, her, is a Vietnamese student and a co-organizer for the Stop Asian Hate rallies in Tulsa. She recognizes that any form of racism, from microaggressions to physical violence, elicits trauma responses. Jade encourages members of the AAPI community to react, confront, and heal the trauma in the way they feel is safest or most comfortable.
It's definitely a hard part to just overcome your own trauma, but it's definitely also hard to not only recognize your own trauma, but also recognize another individual's trauma and not sort of put it on a scale in a way. Just talking about it is very difficult. Just admitting that like you have trauma and you have gone through experiencing racism is sort of a hard thing to recognize. I'm perfectly okay if some of the people in the Asian community are silent about it. I'll talk enough for them. You know, I'm okay with it as long as they at least like take their time in overcoming it.
While not widely acknowledged, pervasive anti-Asian language, violence, and hate crimes continue at an alarming rate. The call to action remains the same and true: the unification of all peoples against the common oppressor that is white supremacy.
I think we need to do more work in bridging the communities. I don't know how that starts, but I think we need more activist leaders willing to speak up and willing to work together as a network. Because it can't just be, you know, the Koreans advocating and then the Chinese advocating and the Vietnamese advocating for separate things, because all of our issues bleed into one another. Recently, I had a leader in my company reach out to me about the Michelle Go incident and just express they're here for me and to tell me to take off as much time as I need to process. The action of showing support means so much. I think that's step one. Show up, show that you're there, and show that you're there to listen.
For Focus, Black Oklahoma, I'm Lydia Jung in Tulsa.
You're listening to Focus, Black Oklahoma.
For some, the Old Settlers Reunion in Cheyenne, Oklahoma is a chance to relive the glory days of the land run. But for the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, it's a painful reminder of all they've lost. Shonda Little has more.
From April 18th to the 23rd, the tiny town of Cheyenne in far western Oklahoma will swell in size during what is called the Old Settlers Reunion. The 5-day extravaganza includes a rodeo, craft show, festive parade, Old West reenactments, and a community-wide barn dance. The Old Settlers Reunion is held in honor of western Oklahoma's earliest white settlers, particularly those who participated in one of the state's earlier, smaller land runs in 1892. But the tiny farming and oil-field enclave is famous, or rather infamous to some, for more than the old settlers and their land run. This special land is atop the sacred Ogallala water aquifer and near the Washita River, and the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes had long called these prairies their ancestral homelands. Today, the National Park Service runs the Washita Battlefield National Historic Site, barely outside of Cheyenne's city limits, to commemorate the significant turn in the United States War with the Plains Indians. Kristen Sumner, administrative assistant at the Washita Battlefield National Historic Site for the National Park Service, works to educate locals and visitors about the event that left many Cheyenne people and their horses slaughtered.
The Battle of the Washita is one of the largest engagements between the Plains Indian tribes and the United States Army, where Lieutenant Colonel George Custer attacked a sleeping Cheyenne village that was operated by Chief Black Kettle. In the attack, Custer killed many Indian casualties, approximately 150. Many of them were women and children.
For some members of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, the Old Settlers Reunion does not represent a joyful jubilee. But as 69-year-old Cheyenne and Arapaho elder and lifelong Roger Mills County resident Ida Hoffman explained, the National Park's Battle of the Washita site is more than a tourist attraction to her people. It is sacred, and the Old Settlers Reunion is a painful reminder of what her tribe has lost and continues to lose at the hands of the white colonization. Hoffman feels the organizers of the reunion could do a better job of including the tribe in the Old Settlers Reunion if they genuinely intended for it to celebrate all of the area's history and early inhabitants. She says the close proximity of the celebration to the tribe's most sacred site leaves many tribe members unwilling to attend the festivities.
Well, they haven't, included our tribe in hardly anything concerning the Settlers Reunion. I don't know if it's always been like that. Very few Indians will go. And it's sad because they're living in our history. And it should also be a celebration for us as well, but we don't feel included into that reunion. The site there is very sacred to us. It has a big meaning in our tribe, and they don't understand. We're willing to share our history. We're willing to talk about our tradition to a certain point. That would be very helpful. In the Red Moon clan, we have chiefs, we have clan members, we have societies. That it's a beautiful thing to see and to know. We never consider it to be a battle. We always considered it to be a massacre because Black Kettle was there as a peace chief.
On April 18th, the 2 hotels in the small town of Cheyenne are expected to be at maximum capacity. Finding a table at the local restaurants will be next to impossible. The main thoroughfare will be packed with gleeful families, many of whom descend directly from those who got free land in the 1892 land run. Hundreds of children will giggle as men dressed like Wild West outlaws act out a gunfight on a street littered with parade candy. But Ida Hoffman and her grandchildren will spend the days of the Old Settlers Reunion on her quiet ancestral farm east of town.
I believe leaving that celebration would set very well with our tribe. We have not been included or even asked, our feelings about it. Because where the town of Cheyenne is, that is where the blood of our ancestors was shed. That means a lot to us. It would be, for instance, if we had a big old celebration right by the cemetery.
For Focus, Black Oklahoma, I'm Shonda Little in Cheyenne.
When the world all but stopped in 2020 thanks to COVID-19, local musicians found themselves struggling to make ends meet as well as share their talents with those quarantined at home. Turns out, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Jamie Glisson has the story.
In order to stay relevant in any business, it is important to be adaptable and innovative. The music industry is no exception, and when the world shut down in 2020 and millions quarantined, no one could predict the nightmare that was to come. Research shows the benefits of music for various mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, and trauma. It acts as a medium for processing emotions and grief, but can also be utilized as a regulating or calming agent. With nearly 5.5 million deaths around the world as of mid-January of 2022, the need for such comfort and escape has hardly been greater. The 2020 South by Southwest Conference and Festival event in Austin, Texas was canceled. It was the first time in 34 years that, quote, the show did not go on, end quote. This cancellation caused a snowball effect, and all of a sudden musicians, both known and unknown, found themselves scrambling for what to do next. John Taylor, the CEO of Taylor Entertainment Group and president of Tulsa Jazz, shares how the pandemic forced musicians to get creative and take chances.
2020 was a year that I really don't have words to describe. First of all, it was unthinkable that the music and the film industry both would almost just shut down completely. That was just unfathomable. These are people who, for quite a few of them, it's their livelihood. And you don't make as much the way it's set up now off of the recorded music. It's also kind of sad that that is the way musicians have to make their money now to pay the bills. The early spring of 2020, when everything shut down, by no fault of their own, they had no income. And there are organizations around the world that started crowdfunding ideas to help musicians with medical bills, to help them feed their families, to help them keep a roof over their head.
The local nonprofit Red Dirt Relief Fund has been providing a safety net of critical assistance for all Oklahoma musicians since 2012. Their 2021 Impact Relief Report stated that in one of the hardest years ever for the music industry trying to rebound from COVID-19 impacts, Red Dirt Relief Fund surpassed their benchmark of granting more than $500,000 in aid to struggling Oklahoma music professionals. In November of 2019, Taylor's organization had over 300 shows pre-booked for 2020. By May, that number was 0.
The beauty of it is you had to really be creative. You're already a creative. You had to take your creative abilities to the next level. So quite a few people started doing virtual shows, which worked fairly well. People had electronic tip jars, and they were doing shows on the regular. There were venues that did private shows. The artists were masked, they performed, and the venue helped the artists to make some money and help these folks survive. One of the things that we did, we actually created a merch company, and it didn't cost the artist anything. We would build their store for them, take their design from maybe an album cover or whatever and put it on products. We'd give them a link. That link went to their store, and then they could get that out to their following, and their following could support them. But you had to really become creative. You had to think differently. I'm not a fan of thinking outside the box. I don't think you should be in the box in the first place. It was a bad time, but it was a creatively invigorating time for a lot of these artists.
Jazz vocalist Carmen Bruner of Bristow grew up singing gospel music in local Oklahoma churches and would occasionally travel out of state for special events. She sang with her 3 older brothers, and they were known as the Bruner family. Carmen's mother taught her to harmonize at age 6, and by age 15, she fell in love with jazz and has explored and studied music ever since.
We used to call ourselves the multicultural Partridge family.
Carmen went on to raise a family and eventually moved back to Bristow, where she met a gentleman that helped launch her career as a jazz singer.
We kind of teamed up and got started with my first project. So I was able to re-record and recreate those songs that I had written and recorded back 30 years ago. So when the pandemic hit, I had just finished my first project. I was ready to venture out, go and do the gigs, do the different venues, and get started, right? I was gung-ho. But then when the pandemic did come about, I didn't really know what to do. So I said, well, at this point, all I could do is do things through social media. So immediately I just kind of pushed my music out there I was able to reach people, internationally, and it was very well received.
While the pandemic left many scrambling on what to do, Carmen took a chance and put her music out for the world to hear. Saxophonist Braylon Desmond Sr. of Muskogee found himself in a similar situation. Before the pandemic hit, Braylon, who was also a member of the local jazz band Instrumental, was so busy he was considering quitting his day job to be a musician full-time. While COVID halted that particular dream, Braylon took to social media and another opportunity fell in his lap.
During COVID, there were so many deaths happening, and a lot of the churches were closed due to, just trying to follow the regulations. And so it was really, really sad because people were having to bury loved ones, but couldn't come together and have like a typical funeral or church service. And so I'd like to mention Keith Bigelow Funeral Homes because he reached out to me and kind of had an idea. He's like, do you mind coming to play for a funeral for a family to kind of to bring somewhat of a normalcy back to the funeral? And I told him yes. And so I did one, and next thing you know, one turned to 2, 3, 4, 5. It kind of kept me employed in my music throughout the pandemic.
As the global pandemic spread across the globe and country after country began to shut down, Oklahoma got creative and adjusted in myriad ways. For Focus Black Oklahoma, I'm Jamie Glisson in Bristow.
Focus Black Oklahoma is produced in partnership with KOSU Radio, Tulsa Artist Fellowship, and Tri-City Collective. Additional support is provided by the George Kaiser Family Foundation and the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropies. Our theme music is by Moffett Music. Focus Black Oklahoma's executive producers are Quresh Ali Lansna and Bracken Clark. Our associate producers are Nick Alexandrov and Vanessa Gaona. Our production intern is Smriti Iyengar. Visit us online at kosu.org, tricitycollective.com/FocusBlackOklahoma, and YouTube at Tri-City Collective. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at FocusBlackOK. You can hear Focus Black Oklahoma on demand for free at kosu.org, NPR One, NPR.org, or wherever you get your podcasts.
KOSU Business Circle memberships are ideal for small businesses looking to support public radio and get a little bit of airtime. To learn how your business can become a member, email development@kosu.org.